In the year 1347, ships began arriving at European ports carrying something invisible. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Trade had connected continents for centuries. Merchants crossed deserts and seas, bringing silk, spices, and stories from distant lands. But this time, the ships carried something else. Within a few years, entire cities would fall silent. Nearly half of Europe's population would vanish. This was not a war, not a famine, not an invasion. It was a disease, and it would change the course of history forever. Most historians trace the origins of the Black Death to Central Asia. The bacterium responsible, Yersinia pestis, likely traveled along the vast trade networks of the Mongol Empire. Caravans moved westward along the Silk Road, stopping in crowded markets and fortified cities. Fleas living on black rats carried the infection. The rats thrived wherever humans stored grain and food. Trade routes became highways for the plague. In 1347, trading ships docked in the Sicilian port of Messina. Witnesses described a horrifying sight. Many sailors were already dead. Others were feverish, delirious, and covered in painful black swellings. Local officials ordered the ships to leave the harbor, but it was too late. The infection had already stepped onto European soil. The disease spread with terrifying speed. It moved through Italy, into France, across Spain, and north toward England. Within months, entire regions were overwhelmed. Victims developed high fevers and painful swollen lymph nodes known as buboes, usually in the neck, armpits, or groin. Dark patches appeared on the skin as tissue died beneath the surface. Many people died within 3 to 5 days of showing symptoms. Imagine a small medieval town, church bells ringing daily, markets filled with voices, children running between wooden stalls. Now imagine those sounds slowly disappearing. Doors shut, windows barred, streets empty. In some villages, so many died that there was no one left to bury the bodies. Graves were dug in mass pits. In certain cities, death carts rolled through the streets each morning, collecting the fallen. Panic spread faster than the disease itself. Without knowledge of bacteria or contagion, people searched desperately for explanations. Some believed the plague was divine punishment. Religious processions filled the streets as communities prayed for mercy. Others looked for someone to blame. Jewish communities were falsely accused of poisoning wells. Across parts of Europe, violent persecutions followed. Fear turned neighbor against neighbor. Doctors tried everything they could imagine. They wore long robes and beaked masks stuffed with herbs and flowers, believing the illness traveled through poisoned air. They burned incense. They prescribed strange remedies. Nothing stopped the spread. In desperation, some cities began isolating ships before allowing them to dock. Vessels were forced to wait offshore for 40 days. This practice became known as quarantine, from the Italian phrase quaranta giorni. It was one of the first organized public health responses in European history. By the early 1350s, the devastation was staggering. Historians estimate that between 25 and 50 million people died in Europe alone. That was roughly 1/3 and possibly as much as half of the continent's population. The Middle East and parts of Asia suffered as well. Entire generations vanished within a few years. Fields went unharvested, livestock wandered untended, trade routes slowed, universities closed, monasteries emptied. But history rarely stands still in the face of catastrophe. With so many laborers gone, surviving workers found themselves in a new position of power. Wages began to rise. Peasants demanded better conditions. In some regions, the rigid feudal system began to weaken. The social balance shifted. The old order, built on abundant labor and strict hierarchy, was shaken. Religious authority was also tested. Many had believed the church could protect them, but priests died alongside their congregations. Some lost faith. Others sought deeper spiritual meaning. The trauma of the Black Death left a permanent mark on art, literature, and culture. Paintings became darker. Themes of mortality became central. The awareness of death was no longer distant. It was immediate. The plague did not disappear after the first wave. It returned again and again in cycles over the next several centuries. Cities would recover, grow, and then face new outbreaks. But the initial catastrophe of the late 1440s remains one of the most devastating biological events in recorded history. The Black Death reshaped economies. It altered power structures. It accelerated social change. Some historians even argue that the disruptions it caused helped lay the groundwork for the Renaissance. It is easy to think of history as a sequence of kings, battles, and empires, but sometimes the most powerful forces are unseen. A bacterium carried by a flea, a rat in the hull of a ship, an invisible organism that crossed continents and redrew the structure of society. The Black Death reminds us that history is not only shaped by human ambition or conflict. Sometimes it is shaped by something far smaller, something silent, something unseen.